I've always had a complicated relationship with my dad and his side of the family, and recently, things reached a breaking point.
Hello, I'm Truly, and welcome to my channel. Thank you for listening, and I am curious. Where and what time are you hearing this story? Please, let me know where you are hearing this in the comments below. Lastly, for more stories, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
The air in my childhood home always hung thick with the unspoken. It wasn't a heavy, oppressive silence, but more like a dense fog, obscuring the landscape of our family. My parents, Caesar and Miranda, had been married for as long as I could remember. Officially, on paper anyway. In reality, they'd been separated for almost 2 decades, a geographical and emotional chasm fixed between them. My father, Caesar, was a force of nature, a charming rogue with a magnetic pull, and a serial womanizer and addict. My mother, Miranda, was his immovable counterpart, a woman of steel and quiet dignity who, thankfully, never tolerated his chaotic orbit. She built a safe, if often solitary, world for us, far from his gravitational pull. My relationship with Dad, and by extension his side of the family, was a meticulously crafted tapestry of conditional love and quiet resentment. I was Steve, his son, a title that carried more weight than affection. He'd make grand promises, only to forget them. He'd offer sage advice, only to contradict it with his actions. He was a phantom limb, always there in concept, rarely in tangible support. Then came Tiffany. She wasn't the first, not by a long shot, but she was the one who stuck. She was a different breed of woman than the others, softer, less confrontational, almost eager to please. And perhaps that's why my father's family, his parents, his siblings, even some of his extended cousins, seemed to gravitate towards her. They liked Tiffany. They welcomed her into their fold, a stark contrast to how they'd always awkwardly skirted around the issue of my mother. It was as if Tiffany, with her gentle smiles and domestic ease, was the woman Dad should have married all than Miranda. The only dissenting voice was my paternal grandmother, Dad's mom. She couldn't stand Tiffany, a fact that both baffled and secretly pleased me. Grandma had a sharp tongue and an even sharper memory, and she harbored a quiet, unwavering loyalty to my mother, the woman who had given her a grandson. This complicated dynamic had been the background noise of my life for years. Christmas dinners at Dad's family house were a masterclass in passive aggression. Tiffany would be there, fussing over Caesar, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes. My aunts and uncles would subtly praise her cooking, her decorating, her very existence, all while casting furtive glances my way, as if to gauge my reaction. I'd learned to perfect a neutral expression, a bland, polite mask that betrayed nothing of the churning storm inside me. I was a guest in a family that was supposed to be mine, watching a stranger take up residence in a space that felt stolen. The breaking point didn't arrive with a bang, but a slow, suffocating creep. Caesar, always robust despite his excesses, had begun to show his age. The years of substance abuse and late nights were catching up. His vibrant energy had dimmed, replaced by a brittle weariness. He was thinner, his once booming voice a little reedy. The family started gathering more often, a flurry of worried calls and hushed conversations. "Your father isn't doing well, Steve," my Aunt Carol would say, her voice dripping with the kind of pity that made my skin crawl. It always felt like an accusation, as if my mother's distance, and by extension my own, was somehow responsible for his decline. Then came the email. It was from Aunt Carol, one of the primary Tiffany boosters. It was an invitation to Caesar's 60th birthday, a surprise party, though knowing Dad, he'd already figured it out. The email listed Tiffany as the co-host, elaborating on her tireless efforts to organize everything, her dedication to making Caesar's milestone special. My name, and therefore my mother's, was barely an afterthought, buried in a generic RSVP line. It was the final straw in a long thread of dismissals. I arrived at the party with a knot of dread in my stomach. The house, usually a chaotic hub of boisterous laughter, felt hushed, almost reverent. Dad was seated in his favorite armchair, looking frail but still possessing that flicker of charm in his eyes. Tiffany was a whirlwind of activity, flitting between guests, her smile plastered on, radiating an air of quiet triumph. My aunts and uncles formed a protective circle around her, their faces beaming with approval. Even Tucker, Caesar and Tiffany's son, a quiet, observant 10-year-old, seemed to understand his mother's elevated status in this space. He looked like a miniature version of my father, and a pang of something akin to jealousy, or was it grief, hit me. He had the attentive, present father I'd always craved. I caught Grandma's eye across the crowded room. She sat perched on a dining chair, her lips pursed, an unreadable expression on her face. Her gaze flickered to Tiffany, then to me, a silent message passing between us. She was my only anchor in this swirling sea of family endorsement for Tiffany. As the evening wore on, the eulogies began. My uncle praised Cesar's resilience. My aunt spoke of his generosity, always carefully weaving in Tiffany's contributions. "Tiffany has been such a rock for Cesar," Aunt Carol gushed, her voice carrying through the subdued room. "She's brought so much stability, so much joy. We've never seen Cesar happier." I felt the familiar heat rise in my chest. It wasn't just about the words, it was the implication. "We've never seen Cesar happier" meant he wasn't happy with Mirana. It meant Mirana, my mother, who dedicated her life to raising me while he chased fleeting desires, was somehow insufficient. It meant her decades of quiet struggle, her fierce protection of me, were being erased by the effervescent presence of Tiffany. I stood by the window, nursing a lukewarm beer, watching the forced cheer. Cesar, emboldened by a few drinks and the outpouring of affection, began to speak. His voice was raspy, but he held court. He spoke of his life, his regrets, his triumphs. And then he said it. "You know," he slurred slightly, gesturing vaguely around the room, "I've made a lot of mistakes, a lot of bad choices. I regret a lot of things. But looking around now, seeing all of you, seeing Tiffany." He paused, his gaze resting on her, a tender, almost vulnerable look. "I wouldn't change a thing about where I am today. I wouldn't trade this for anything." The words hung in the air, a bell tolling for my mother. I wouldn't change a thing about where I am today. It was a quiet, insidious declaration that his marriage to Mirana, the mother of his firstborn, the woman he'd built a life with, was the mistake he wouldn't trade this for. It was the ultimate, unspoken admission of regret for marrying her, veiled in the guise of appreciation for his current life. My hands clenched, the beer bottle suddenly feeling like a fragile bomb. I saw Grandma flinch, a sharp intake of breath. Tiffany, oblivious or perhaps deliberately ignoring the undertone, beamed. The rest of the family nodded, murmuring agreements. Something snapped inside me. Years of banked frustration, years of feeling invisible, years of watching my mother be quietly dismissed, erupted. I didn't think, I just moved. I walked straight towards Cesar, the silence around me expanding as I approached. "Dad," I said, my voice dangerously even. Everyone turned, surprised by my sudden directness. Even Cesar looked startled, his gaze a little unfocused. "Steve, son," he began, a forced, hearty tone. "Good to see you." "Is it?" I asked, cutting him off. My voice was low, but it commanded attention. "Because for years, you never seemed to care much about seeing me or Mom. Not really." A ripple went through the room. Aunt Carol gasped. Tiffany's smile faltered. "What are you talking about, son?" Cesar said, his brow furrowing, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "It's my birthday. Don't start with this." "Don't start with what, Dad?" I pressed, stepping closer, my eyes locked on his. "The truth? The truth that for decades you've been absent, that you've broken every promise, every commitment, that you've lived your life entirely for yourself, leaving Mom to pick up the pieces, leaving me to wonder what kind of father I had." "Steve," Aunt Carol interjected, her voice sharp, "this is hardly the time or place." "Oh, it's not the time or place to talk about family truth," I retorted, turning my gaze to her, my voice rising slightly. "But it's perfectly fine to stand here and praise Tiffany as the savior of Cesar's life, as if Mom was nothing, as if her decades of unwavering strength, of raising me alone, mean absolutely nothing, as if Dad regretting marrying her is some kind of noble sentiment." The room fell silent, the cheerful buzz completely extinguished. Tiffany looked mortified, her cheeks flushed. Tucker, his eyes wide, clutched his mother's leg. Cesar pushed himself up from his chair, his face hardening. "You have no right, Steve. You don't understand. Mirana and I. That was a mistake a long time ago. Tiffany has brought me happiness." "A mistake?" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "She wasn't a mistake, Dad. She was your wife. She was my mother. And you regretting marrying her, telling me that you wouldn't trade your life now for anything, is a slap in the face to every single painful, messy, beautiful thing she went through with you, for us." My voice cracked on the last word. The years of emotional baggage, of trying to understand, of trying to forgive, were too heavy. I looked around at their faces, my aunts and uncles, looking scandalized, some with pity, some with anger. Tiffany was crying, silent tears tracking down her face. and Caesar, my father, stood there, his jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed, looking at me not with sorrow but with resentment. "You know what, Dad?" I said, my voice barely a whisper now, but filled with a searing conviction. "You're right. I don't understand. I don't understand how a family can embrace a mistress instead of honoring the mother of their firstborn. I don't understand how you can look me in the eye and say you regret the person who gave you life and raised your son." I took a deep breath, the air burning in my lungs. I'm done trying to understand. I'm done trying to be part of this charade. I turned, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces, landing finally on Grandma. Her eyes held a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Pain, pride, understanding. I offered her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then, without another word, I walked out. I walked past the beautifully decorated cake, past the smiling family photos that included Tiffany, past the carefully chosen gifts. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving behind the suffocating fog of their unspoken truths. The drive home was a blur of raw emotion. Anger, yes, but also a profound sense of liberation. The knot in my stomach had loosened, replaced by a hollow ache, but an ache that felt clean finally. I went straight to my mother's house. She was sitting in her favorite armchair, reading, a cup of tea beside her. She looked up, her steady gaze meeting mine. She didn't ask what was wrong, she just seemed to know. "It broke," I said, my voice hoarse, the dam finally breaking. "Everything. It just broke." She closed her book, set it aside, and simply reached out for me. I knelt beside her chair, burying my face in her shoulder, and for the first time in years I wept. She didn't offer platitudes or condemn Caesar, she just held me, her strength a tangible comfort. "You did what you had to do, Steve," she whispered, stroking my hair. "You honored yourself. You honored us." Later that night, my phone buzzed. It was Grandma. I hesitated, then answered. "Steve," her voice was firm but softer than usual. "Are you all right, dear?" "I will be, Grandma." "Good. You did good, boy." Someone had to say it. That woman. She was just another one of his follies, but she stayed, and they just pretend. It's sickening. There was a pause. "Your mother. She deserved better. You deserved better. And I'm sorry I never said it as loudly as you just did." Her words were a balm, an unexpected validation that settled deep within me. I knew then that my relationship with Cesar and his side of the family would never be the same. It was over, that painful dance of conditional acceptance and quiet resentment. I no longer needed to chase their approval or try to fit into a mold that didn't recognize the truth of my own history. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. The pain of a fractured family doesn't simply disappear. But for the first time, I felt like I was charting my own course, guided by the compass of my own integrity, rather than the shifting winds of theirs. The breaking point had been devastating, but it had also been the necessary shattering that allowed me to finally see clearly and to begin to heal. The silence was deafening, yet it sang with a peace I hadn't known in 27 years. I sat on my couch, a lukewarm mug of coffee forgotten in my hand, staring at the muted television screen. It had been weeks since I'd sent the last text, blocked the last number, severed the last thread connecting me to my father, Caesar, and his entire side of the family. The air in my apartment felt lighter, breathable for the first time. For years, that side of my family had been a source of constant tension, a tangled knot of unresolved resentments and unspoken truths. And at its very core, the Gordian knot that was Tucker. He wasn't a bad kid, not by any stretch of the imagination. He was just a living, breathing testament to my dad's betrayal of my mother, Miranda, and everything that had gone wrong in our family. I held no ill will towards Tucker personally. He didn't ask for any of this, for his existence to be a wound that never quite healed. But I didn't owe him a relationship, and I was done trying to earn the love of people who never really wanted me in the first place. I'd tried. God, I'd tried. From a confused kid to a hopeful teenager, I'd poured my energy into finding a place in that sprawling, fragmented family, only to find myself perpetually on the outside looking in. The only one who ever truly supported me from that side was my paternal grandmother, a stoic woman with eyes that held centuries of wisdom and a quiet strength that belied her gentle demeanor. "You are the legitimate child, Steve," she'd often whisper, her hand a reassuring weight on my arm. "Don't forget that. Stand firm." And now, finally, I was. My earliest memories of Tucker were hazy, mixed with the usual chaotic energy of family gatherings. He was just another kid, a distant cousin perhaps, always present at my paternal grandparents' house. He'd be there for Christmas, for Thanksgiving, even for my dad's birthday. I remember asking my mom, Marana, once, when I was perhaps 5 or 6, why Tucker was always around. She'd stiffened, her jaw clenching almost imperceptibly, and murmured something vague about him being a friend of the family. Even then, a child's intuition picked up on the subtle shift in her voice, the way her eyes would dart towards my dad whenever Tucker was mentioned. As I grew older, the whispers started, not just among the adults, but among my cousins, the ones who were a little older, a little savvier. Did you know Tucker's actually? They'd start, their voices dropping, eyes wide with scandalous knowledge. The pieces began to click into place with the cold, hard logic of childhood deduction. Why did Tucker look so much like my dad? Why did Caesar always seem to have a special, almost protective affection for him? Why did Mom look so sad every time Tucker's name came up? The truth, when it finally revealed itself in a blinding, ugly flash during a screaming match between my parents when I was 10, was devastating. He regrets marrying me. Steve, my mother had choked out, tears streaming down her face, her voice raw with years of suppressed pain. He confessed it to me years ago. He said he should have waited for Tiffany. Tiffany, the name hung in the air, a venomous, invisible fog. Tucker's mother, my father's mistress, the woman he apparently wished he'd married instead of my own mother. The shock was a physical blow. It wasn't just that my dad had cheated. It was the depth of his regret for my mother, the woman who loved him fiercely, the woman he had chosen. It felt like a rejection of our entire family, of me. Tucker, then, wasn't just a boy. He was a walking, talking monument to that regret, to that betrayal. From that day forward, my relationship with my dad fractured irrevocably. The love I felt for him, once so pure and unquestioning, became tainted with a bitterness I couldn't shake. I watched him now, with a new, cynical lens. I saw the way his eyes lit up when Tucker walked into a room, the easy laughter they shared, the casual touches that never quite extended to me in the same way. It wasn't just perception, it was a stark, undeniable reality. Tucker was the favored son, the one he seemingly preferred. I tried to bridge the chasm, I really did. I'd show up to family dinners at Grandma's, even when I knew Tucker would be there. I'd try to engage my dad in conversations about my life, my interests, my dreams. But his attention always seemed divided, his gaze drifting towards Tucker, who'd often be excitedly recounting some school achievement or a new sports victory. My successes, when I shared them, were met with polite nods, a perfunctory "that's good, son," before he'd turn back to Tucker, a genuine smile gracing his lips. It felt like I was constantly auditioning for a role I was never going to get, a second-place contestant in a race I hadn't even realized I was running against a competitor who wasn't even aware of the stakes. Aunt Carol, Cesar's sister, was perhaps the most frustrating of them all. She wasn't malicious, not overtly, but she was a constant enabler of my dad's behavior, and frankly, a champion of the blended family narrative that ignored the real, raw pain her brother had inflicted. "Oh, Steve, you and Tucker should really spend more time together," she'd chirp, a forced cheerfulness in her voice. "He looks up to you, you know. You're his big brother." My big brother? The words tasted like ash. My stomach would tighten, a familiar knot of resentment forming. How could I be a big brother to someone who was a constant, living reminder of my mother's heartbreak and my own sense of displacement? Aunt Carol saw only the surface, the potential for a Hallmark card moment, oblivious to the decades of quiet devastation that underscored our existence. She'd push for family vacations where Tucker was included, for joint birthday celebrations, never once acknowledging the elephant in the room that was my parents' fractured marriage and my mother's silent suffering. She was a loud, well-meaning, but ultimately destructive force in my attempts to find peace within that family structure. Through all of this, Grandma remained my anchor. She never overtly criticized Caesar, but her disapproval was clear in her quiet observations. She'd watch me, her eyes filled with a deep, knowing sadness, and then she'd pull me aside. "Your mother," she'd say, her voice soft but firm. "She is a good woman, Steve, a truly good woman." And then, the vital validation. "You are the legitimate child, Steve. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. Stand firm in who you are." Her words were a shield against the pervasive feeling of being forgotten, a balm to the wound of being second best. She saw me, truly saw me, and her belief in my worth, in my place, was the only thing that kept me from completely crumbling. She taught me, without ever needing to say it directly, that some battles aren't worth fighting, but some truths are worth holding on to. The breaking point arrived, as most cataclysms do, disguised as just another Sunday dinner. It was Cesar's 60th birthday, a milestone event, and my grandma, bless her heart, had insisted on a full family gathering, hoping, perhaps naively, that the solemnity of the occasion might thaw some of the long-standing ice. Miranda surprisingly agreed to come, a silent protest of her own, a statement that she was still his wife, still present. Tucker, naturally, was there, beaming, flanked by Tiffany, who hovered awkwardly at the edges of the main family group. The evening was a slow-motion car crash. Aunt Carol, ever the instigator of forced family fun, suggested a round of toasts. One by one, family members offered generic well wishes. Then it was Tucker's turn. He stood, a confident smile on his face, and launched into a heartfelt monologue about my dad. He spoke of Cesar as his hero, his mentor, the man who'd always been there for him, who'd taught him everything he knew. He spoke of shared fishing trips and late-night talks, moments that felt like they belonged to a different family, a different father. And my dad, Cesar, watched him, tears welling in his eyes, a look of profound love and pride etched on his face. It was too much. The air was thick with it, the unspoken comparison, the blatant display of favoritism. I looked at Miranda across the table. Her face was a mask of polite indifference, but her eyes, when they met mine, held a deep, aching sadness that mirrored my own. And in that moment, Grandma's words resonated in my ears. "You are the legitimate child, Steve. Stand firm." When my dad finally turned to me, his eyes still misty from Tucker's adulation, and offered a week, and Steve, my eldest son, always, a good boy, the dismissiveness of it, the sheer lack of emotion compared to the raw feeling he'd just shown Tucker, snapped something inside me. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. All eyes turned to me. My voice, when it came, was steady, though a tremor ran through my hands. "You know, for years I tried to be the son you wanted, Dad," I began, my gaze fixed on Cesar. He flinched, surprised by my directness. "I tried to believe that all the love you gave Tucker, all the time you spent with him was just extra, that it didn't detract from me. But it did." Aunt Carol started to interject. "Steve, darling, this isn't the time." I cut her off, my voice rising slightly. "No, Aunt Carol, this is exactly the time. This is 20 years too late. You want us to be one big happy family? You want me to be a big brother to Tucker? How can I, when every time I look at him, I see the heartbreak you caused Mom? I see the regret you feel about marrying her, Dad. I see everything that made our home a battlefield instead of a sanctuary." Cesar's face was a mixture of shock and anger. "Steve, you're being disrespectful," he growled. "Disrespectful?" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping me. Disrespectful was having a second family and pretending ours was whole. Disrespectful was prioritizing another son while I was begging for your attention. Grandma always told me to stand firm, to remember who I am, and I'm standing firm now. I looked around the table at the stunned faces, at Tiffany's wide, uncomfortable eyes, at Tucker's bewildered expression. And then I met Miranda's gaze. A faint, almost imperceptible nod from her, a silent acknowledgement of my pain and her own. "I'm done," I stated, my voice clear and unwavering. "I'm done trying to earn a love that was never freely given. I'm done trying to fit into a family dynamic that broke my mother's heart and made me feel like an afterthought. I deserve peace, and I deserve love that doesn't come with conditions or comparisons." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving behind the shocked silence, the half-eaten cake, and the shattered illusion of a happy family. I didn't look back. The weeks that followed were a blur of phone calls I didn't answer, texts I didn't read, and eventually the satisfying click of block contact. Aunt Carol tried, of course, a barrage of increasingly distressed messages, accusing me of tearing the family apart. I just deleted them. Cesar even sent a curt, angry email demanding an apology. I archived it without opening. The only call I returned was to Grandma a few days later. She didn't scold me, didn't try to mediate. She simply said, "You finally stood firm, my boy. I am proud of you." And with that, the last thread snapped. There was no grand confrontation, no dramatic shouting match to mark the final severance. Just a quiet, resolute decision to choose my own mental health, my own peace, over the endless, exhausting drama of a family that had never truly embraced me, save for one wise old woman. The silence that now filled my life was no longer deafening. It was liberating. Tucker was a constant reminder of my dad's betrayal, yes, but now he was a reminder I no longer had to engage with. I didn't owe him a relationship, nor did I owe my father the emotional labor of perpetuating a lie. The complicated relationship was over. The breaking point had come and gone. And I, Steve, was finally choosing peace over pain. The air tasted sweet, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, unequivocally free.